What if I told you that a 6-year-old boy was kidnapped in broad daylight from a park in 1951, and 73 years later, his niece took a DNA test for fun and discovered he was still alive? This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Luis Albino, a child who vanished without a trace, a mother who searched until her dying breath, and a $99 DNA kit that solved one of the longest cold cases in American history. Stay until the very end of this two-part story, because what happens when this man discovers he's been living under a stolen identity for 7 decades will leave you speechless. If stories like this captivate you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single moment, and I need you to comment below and tell me, would you take a DNA test if you thought it might uncover a family secret? Let's see what you'd do. Oakland, California, February 21st, 1951. It's a mild Wednesday afternoon in the post-war boom years, and in a neighborhood park on Brush Street, children are playing tag and swinging from monkey bars. 2 brothers laugh as they chase each other across the grass, their voices mixing with the sounds of other kids enjoying the last hour of daylight before dinner. 6-year-old Luis and his 10-year-old brother Roger Albino are recent arrivals to the neighborhood. The Albino family moved here from Puerto Rico just a year earlier, part of a wave of immigrant families seeking new opportunities on the mainland. The boys speak mainly Spanish at home and are still picking up English at school, but on the playground, none of that matters. Here, they're just 2 kids enjoying a carefree day. Luis is a petite boy with dark hair and an infectious smile. He idolizes Roger, who has a protective streak for his younger brother that runs deep. On this particular day, Roger keeps a watchful eye as Luis digs in the sandbox, building elaborate castles with the damp sand. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows as other children start to head home for supper. The Albino boys know they should be getting back soon too. Their mother likes them home before dark. But just a few more minutes of play, they think. Just a few more minutes. As the brothers play, a woman in her early 30s approaches the park. She's a stranger to them, wearing a bright green bandana tied over her hair. She watches the boys for a moment before walking over with a friendly wave, and when she speaks, it's in smooth, fluent Spanish. Roger glances up warily at this unknown lady. In 1951, there are no widespread stranger danger campaigns, no common knowledge that kids shouldn't talk to unfamiliar adults. Still, something about the situation puts Roger on mild alert. But Luis, being only 6 and naturally trusting, gives a big smile when the woman addresses them in Spanish, the same language his family speaks at home. She feels familiar in that sense, like someone from their community. The woman chats with them casually, asking their names and ages. Roger notices she seems very interested in Luis in particular, her eyes lingering on his little brother's face, her smile a bit too wide, too eager. Then she offers the boys a treat. "If you come with me, I'll buy you some candy," she says, smiling brightly. Luis's eyes light up at the mention of candy. He's just a little kid. The promise of sweets from a seemingly kind adult is hard to resist. Roger, on the other hand, hesitates. Something in his gut tells him this isn't right. Who is this lady, and why is she offering candy out of the blue? Their mother taught them to be polite, especially to adults, but also not to wander off with strangers. However, before Roger can say much, the woman gently takes Luis's hand. "Come on, Niño. The store is just over there," she coos, gesturing vaguely beyond the park. Luis innocently jumps to his feet, ready to follow, excited about the promised treat. Roger trails behind them as they start walking, not wanting to be left out if there's candy to be had, but also increasingly anxious. They exit the park and head down the sidewalk. Roger notices the woman is walking quickly, her grip on Luis's hand firm, almost urgent. After a block or two, Roger's unease grows into real fear. This route isn't toward any store he knows. In fact, they seem to be heading further from the Albino's neighborhood, away from the familiar streets he knows. The woman's grip on Luis's hand has tightened, and she's moving faster now, pulling his little brother along. Roger's heart beats faster. At 10 years old, he might not fully comprehend the concept of kidnapping, but he knows when something feels terribly, terribly wrong. Before we continue, I need you to drop a comment right now. Tell me, what would you do if you were Roger in this situation? Would you run for help or try to stop her yourself? Let me know your thoughts. Roger pipes up, his voice trembling slightly. "Excuse me, where are we going? I thought the candy store was near the park." The woman glances back at Roger, and for just a moment, her friendly demeanor slips. Her eyes are cold, calculating. "It's a little farther, just keep coming," she replies curtly, still in Spanish, and something in her tone makes Roger's blood run cold. Roger slows his steps. A cold prickle of fear runs through his entire body. He's now several paces behind, and he notices the woman subtly pulling Luis along even faster, almost dragging him now. Suddenly, Roger makes a decision. This isn't right, and he needs to tell Mom. He calls out, "Luis, I'm going to get Mom." Perhaps he hopes this will scare the woman into stopping, make her realize someone will come looking, but she doesn't even turn around. She just keeps walking, faster now, pulling Luis around a corner. Roger turns on his heel and sprints back toward home, his legs pumping with adrenaline and dread, his heart pounding so hard he can hear it in his ears. He yells his little brother's name a couple of times as he runs, his voice cracking with panic. But Luis and the woman have already disappeared from sight, swallowed up by the city streets. Within minutes, Roger bursts through the front door of their modest home, gasping for breath and shouting in a mix of Spanish and broken English to his mother, Antonia, a strong 33-year-old mother of 6. She had been tidying up the kitchen, expecting her boys home any minute for dinner. When Roger comes racing in, wide-eyed and terrified, gasping for air, she knows immediately that something is catastrophically wrong. He blurts out the story between sobs. A lady at the park took Luis. She promised candy. They walked away, and now Luis is gone. I tried to follow, but she was too fast, and I ran back to get you, and I don't know where they went. At first, Antonia struggles to understand. Her English is limited, and Roger is babbling frantically, words tumbling over each other in panic. But she catches the key words: Luis, mujer, woman, dulces, candy. And the sight of her eldest son's sheer panic tells her enough. Her baby boy has been taken. Antonia's heart nearly stops. For one terrible moment, the world goes silent, and then her maternal instincts kick in with fierce intensity. She doesn't waste a second. Still dressed in her apron, she dashes out the door with Roger in tow and races down the streets toward the park, calling out Luis's name at the top of her lungs. Neighbors turn their heads, alarmed. A couple of folks step outside, sensing the emergency in this mother's voice. They reach the little park. The swings sway empty in the breeze. The sandbox where Luis had been playing just minutes ago is deserted, his little handprints still visible in the sand. There's no sign of Luis, nor the mysterious woman in the green bandana. Antonia's chest tightens. She feels faint with terror, but she refuses to collapse. She has to find her son. She has to. She questions the few people still around, grabbing their arms, her voice desperate. "Have you seen my little boy?" A small boy, dark hair, this tall, wearing a blue shirt. She's crying, barely able to get the words out. A teenage girl who is sitting on a bench says she vaguely noticed a woman walking off with a small boy earlier, but she assumed it was his mother and didn't pay much attention. That confirmation sends a chill through Antonia's entire body. Some stranger truly has her child. As the reality sets in, as the full horror of what's happening crashes over her, Antonia lets out a wail of despair. It's a primal, heart-rending cry that echoes across the emptying park, a sound of pure maternal anguish that makes everyone who hears it stop in their tracks. Roger stands by, tears streaming down his face, feeling helpless and guilty. He's still just a kid himself, and he doesn't have the words to comfort his mother. All he can say, over and over, his voice breaking, is, "She took Luis, Mama. I'm sorry. I tried. She took him." Nightfall comes to Oakland. What began as a sunny afternoon of play has transformed into every parent's worst nightmare. Antonia knows she needs help, and she needs it now. She must get the police to find Luis, and fast. Through sobs and broken English, she manages to get someone to call the authorities. Soon, patrol car lights bathe the street in red and blue flashes as 2 officers arrive at the albino home. The officers face an immediate challenge: the language barrier. Antonia speaks mostly Spanish and only a little English. The Oakland Police Department of 1951 has very few Spanish-speaking officers. Roger tries his best to translate his mother's pleas, to explain what happened. He tells them about the woman with the bandana who lured his brother away with promises of candy. But as a frightened 10-year-old struggling to communicate in his second language, Roger's story initially raises eyebrows among the officers. The police ask him the same questions over and over, their skepticism barely hidden. Who was this woman? Did you recognize her? What exactly did she say? Where did they go? Roger, choking back tears, describes her as best he can. She had something green on her head, like a bandana. She spoke Spanish, just like us. She said she'd get Luis candy. I didn't recognize her. She was a stranger. One officer quietly wonders aloud if Roger might be making up a wild story to cover for some accident. Child abductions by strangers are exceedingly rare in those days, almost unheard of. It's far more common for children to wander off and get lost or hurt. Another officer looks around the modest living room of the albino home, and sees family photos lined up on a shelf, including one of 6-year-old Luis grinning gap-toothed at the camera. This was a real child, now missing. Whether or not they believe Roger's candy-wielding kidnapper tale, a little boy is gone, and they have to respond. Within hours, the Oakland Police Department launches a citywide search. They start at the park, combing the area for any clues, a dropped toy, footprints in the sand, any witness who might have seen where the woman went. They knock on doors through the neighborhood, asking if anyone saw a young Puerto Rican boy being led away by a woman. A few neighbors join in, forming small search parties to canvass the surrounding streets and alleys with flashlights as darkness falls completely. As the evening deepens into night, Antonia can barely keep upright. She clutches her rosary in one hand and a small photograph of Luis in the other, alternating between numb shock and waves of absolute panic. Each time she hears footsteps or a voice outside, she rushes to the door, hoping desperately that someone is bringing her son back. But each time it's just another neighbor or officer with no news, just sad, sympathetic looks. By midnight, this has escalated beyond a routine missing child call. The description of a possible abductor, a woman in her 30s, Spanish-speaking, wearing a bandana, has been broadcast to all local law enforcement. Oakland police coordinate with nearby departments. They aren't taking any chances. If there's even a possibility that a predator kidnapped a child, they have to act swiftly. Early the next morning, soldiers from a nearby U.S. Army base volunteer to help in the effort. Dozens of military personnel in fatigues join police officers and civilian volunteers to scour a roughly 9-block radius around the park. They search backyards, sheds, alleys, any place a child might be hidden or restrained. In 1951, there's no unified 911 system, no Amber Alert to instantly spread the word across the region, but local radio stations pick up the story. Missing 6-year-old boy in West Oakland, possible abduction by a woman last seen wearing a green bandana. The news travels through the Bay Area by word of mouth and radio bulletins. Tips start to trickle in. Somebody at a bus stop thought they saw a woman with a crying boy matching that description. Another person reports hearing a child's shout near the rail yard. Each tip is followed up meticulously, officers racing to every location, but none lead anywhere concrete. It's as if the woman and Luis vanished into thin air, as if they were never there at all. The Oakland police, uncertain if Luis truly was snatched or perhaps wandered off on his own, consider all possibilities. There's a grim theory floated early on. What if little Luis fell into the water and drowned? The park isn't far from San Francisco Bay, and a wandering child could conceivably reach the waterfront. To rule this out, the U.S. Coast Guard is called in. Over the next day, Coast Guard boats patrol the bay and its inlets, searching for any sign of a small body. Divers check the murky shallows around the docks of Jack London Square and other nearby waterways. It is an agonizing sight for Antonia. When she hears that they're searching the water, that the police think her son might be dead in the bay, it's almost too much to bear. She vehemently insists to anyone who will listen, shaking her head violently, tears streaming down her face. No, mi hijo está vivo. My son is alive. He was taken. Roger, along with his older siblings and neighbors who know the family, backs up the account of the mysterious woman. They tried desperately to convey that Luis wouldn't wander off on his own. He was always either with his brother or under watch. Something had to have happened beyond him just getting lost. The search of the water turns up nothing. No trace of Luis. On one hand, that's a relief. No news in this case means he wasn't found drowned. But on the other hand, it deepens the mystery. If he didn't fall in the bay and drown, where is he? A child doesn't just evaporate into thin air. As day turns to night and back to day again, 48 hours have passed since Luis disappeared. The newspapers pick up the story, at least in the local press. The Oakland Tribune prints an article describing the missing boy and the desperate search, even including a grainy photograph of Luis and Roger together, taken not long before that fateful day. The community is on edge. Parents clutch their children a little closer, realizing that a stranger abducting a child is a terrifying possibility they hadn't considered in their quiet neighborhood. But despite the media attention and the intense search efforts involving hundreds of people, no solid leads emerge. Police detectives interrogate Roger repeatedly in those first days, pressing him for every detail he can remember. Each time, Roger recounts the same basic story. A woman came up to them, spoke Spanish, wore a bandana, promised candy, and led Luis away. Yes, he followed at first. No, he didn't recognize her. Yes, she seemed to know how to talk to kids, seemed friendly at first. No, he never saw a car or a license plate. She was on foot, walking fast. Roger, just a child himself, feels guilty and traumatized. The investigators aren't harsh with him, but they are persistent, likely because they have so little else to go on. Roger's information is the only eyewitness account of the abduction. They must be absolutely sure it's accurate and hope desperately that he recalls something more useful, like a distinctive feature of the woman or where she might have headed. Meanwhile, Antonia is living every second in tortured uncertainty. She barely eats or sleeps, instead spending her time at the police station or out with search parties until sheer exhaustion forces her to rest for a few hours. Because she doesn't speak English fluently, each interaction with authorities requires a translator, a kind neighbor, or sometimes one of her older children if they know more English from school. Despite the communication gap, the local police come to know her by sight and by her unwavering determination. For the first few weeks, Antonia arrives at the police precinct every single morning as soon as the doors open. Officers come to recognize this grief-stricken mother walking in at dawn, hoping for any news about her little boy. Every day, the answer is the same. No news, no progress. They gently tell her, "Lo siento, no hay noticias, señora." Nothing yet. Antonia goes home in tears, only to return the next day and ask again, unable to accept that her son has simply disappeared without a trace. Comment below if you think you could handle what this family went through. Could you keep searching day after day with no answers? Let me know. The empathy of some officers begins to wear thin as the trail grows colder with each passing day. With each day that passes, the likelihood of finding Luis alive dwindles in their minds. Other cases and duties pile up. Oakland is a big city, and in 1951 there are many challenges. Crime, post-war adjustments, racial tensions, and a police force not equipped with the modern tools we have today. Eventually, the exhaustive search efforts are scaled back. The soldiers return to base. The Coast Guard resumes normal patrols. Volunteers have to go back to their lives, their jobs, their own families. A small corps of detectives continues to investigate Luis's disappearance, but without leads, without evidence, without witnesses, the case slides into that dreaded category, a cold case. Weeks turn into months. The missing posters that were tacked to telephone poles and shop windows fade and tear in the rain and sun. Tips have completely dried up. The woman with the bandana remains a phantom, a ghost. No one has come forward with any clue to her identity. There is no physical evidence to examine, and in 1951, forensic science was primitive anyway. No security cameras to check, no DNA testing, not even an FBI missing children database existed yet. Luis's disappearance seems to be a tragic one-off incident with no explanation, no resolution. It's frustrating and demoralizing for the police. For the albino family, it's life-shattering. Yet through this darkness, Antonia never truly succumbs to despair. Every single day she prays for her boy. She lights candles beneath the crucifix in her home, pleading with God to keep Luis safe until he can be found. She refuses to entertain the idea that he might be dead. There is a powerful maternal intuition combined with raw, unshakable hope that tells her he is alive somewhere. Someone is caring for him. Perhaps that thought is what keeps her going. The notion that maybe, just maybe, Luis is in a home somewhere out there, growing up and living, even if it's without her. At first, Antonia continues her daily pilgrimage to the Oakland police station. Nearly every morning she shows up, often carrying a small bilingual flyer with Luis's photo that she thrusts into the hands of any official who will pay attention. The officers at the Missing Persons Bureau come to expect her arrival. Some days she brings one of Luis's older siblings or a neighbor to help translate and plead her case. One can only imagine how heart-wrenching those encounters are. A mother with red-rimmed eyes, wordlessly searching the officers' faces for any hint of news, and the officers slowly shaking their heads in apology, their eyes full of sympathy but empty of answers. After a year of no answers, some people might have given up, might have accepted that Luis was gone forever. But Antonia is not most people, though as time goes on, she cannot maintain the daily visits. Life and her other children require attention. She has 5 other kids who need their mother, who need food on the table and help with homework and comfort in their own grief. She settles into a ritual of visiting the police station once a week. Every week she shows up and asks, in her broken English, "Noticias de mi hijo?" Any news of my son? And every week she's met with the same gentle, regretful headshake. Oakland's police, to their credit, do not forget the case entirely. Occasionally, a new detective is assigned to review old files, or an out-of-state child matching Luis's description turns up, and they investigate the possibility, always ending in disappointment. Each year, around the anniversary of his disappearance, maybe a small blurb runs in the local paper to remind the public that Luis Albino is still missing. But with no new information, public interest wanes. The world moves on. As the 1950s give way to the 1960s, the world rapidly changes around the Albino family. The older children grow up into young adults, starting lives and families of their own. Roger, the protective brother who witnessed the abduction, carries guilt and trauma with him like a weight on his shoulders. In quiet moments, he replays that day in his mind over and over. What if he hadn't let Luis go with the woman at all? What if he had screamed for help sooner or grabbed Luis and run? What if he had fought harder? These unanswerable questions weigh on him for the rest of his life. Around 1966, a flicker of hope emerges. Luis would have been 21 years old that year, an adult. If he were alive, he might have had to register for the draft or take a military service exam as the Vietnam War was ramping up and every young man was being called to serve. The Albino family seizes on this idea. Maybe somewhere in government records, a 21-year-old man with Luis's name or birthday might appear. It's a long shot, especially if he was given a new identity by whoever took him, but the family doesn't want to miss any chance. They petition authorities and scour whatever public records they can access. Some family members even travel back to Puerto Rico, thinking perhaps the kidnapper could have taken Luis back there. After all, the woman spoke Spanish. Maybe she had roots in their old community. Maybe she was part of some network that trafficked children back to the island. For a few months, energy is renewed in the search. Roger and another sibling, traveling on money they've scraped together, accompany Antonia on trips to Puerto Rico, asking questions, showing photos of little Luis, chasing down every rumor and whisper. Unfortunately, every lead turns into a dead end. There's no sign of Luis in military records under his birth name. The trips to Puerto Rico come up empty. Relatives there have no information, and no one recalls a random child appearing in the area back in the early 1950s. The disappointment is crushing, absolutely devastating. But Antonia still does not surrender hope. She cannot. By the late 1960s and 1970s, the landscape of missing children cases begins to ever so slowly shift. High-profile child abductions in later decades, like Eaton Pat's in 1979, will eventually lead to changes like faces on milk cartons and nationwide alert systems. But all that is still in the future. For Antonia, the only constant is her steadfast belief that one day her son will return to her. Her weekly police station visits become monthly as the years pass and the decades pile up. She ages visibly. Her hair turns gray, then white. Wrinkles deepen around her eyes and mouth. But the detectives at Oakland PD still recognize her whenever she walks through the door. By now, new generations of officers have heard the story of the mother who never stopped looking for her boy, the legend of Antonia Albino. When Antonia comes in yearly by the 1980s, she hardly needs to speak. The desk sergeant will see her walk through the door and simply lower his eyes sadly. "No news, Mrs. Albino." "I'm sorry." She'll nod, perhaps shed a tear that she quickly wipes away, and quietly leave. The weight of decades of uncertainty on her shoulders, her back a little more bent each year. Inside her wallet, Antonia keeps a laminated clipping from a 1951 newspaper, the one reporting Luis's abduction. It's folded and worn, the edges frayed from being handled thousands of times, but she carries it everywhere like a talisman, like a piece of her missing son. She also keeps a portrait of 6-year-old Luis on the wall of her home, garlanded with a palm frond on the anniversary of his disappearance every year. To other family members and friends, it might seem like an obsession that keeps her wounds forever fresh, that prevents her from healing. But for Antonia, this ritual, this remembrance, is how she keeps her boy alive in her heart. She cannot forget. She will not forget. Time is merciless, relentless. By the turn of the millennium, 5 full decades have passed since that February day in 1951. The new century arrives with its celebrations and fireworks, and Antonia is now in her late 80s. Many of Luis's siblings have grandchildren of their own now. The family has grown and changed so much, yet one piece has always been missing. One empty chair at every holiday table. In living rooms, at family gatherings, they often reminisce about Puerto Rico, about coming to California with such hope, and inevitably about Luisito. Nieces and nephews who never met him still feel like they know him because the story has been told so many times, passed down like a family legend. He's the ghost of the family, the boy who disappeared, the what-if that haunts every celebration. Over the years, some relatives privately assumed Luis must have died long ago. How could he still be alive after so much time? But no one ever voiced that thought to Antonia. They respected her unbreakable conviction that Luis was alive somewhere, and maybe deep down they too nurtured a small flame of hope, however faint, however unlikely. In 2005, at the age of 92, Antonia Albino passes away. It's a gentle death in her sleep, peaceful after a long life filled with both great hardship and great love. In her final years, even as memory began to slip away and dementia crept in, she would still ask occasionally, her voice thin and confused, "Donde está Luis? Where is Luis?" It became clear to everyone that she never stopped waiting for him to walk through the door, never stopped hoping that one day she would see her little boy again. Her funeral is attended by all her surviving children and dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As they celebrate her life, they also acknowledge the sorrow she carried to her grave, the question that was never answered. She never found out what happened to her little boy. A framed photo of Luis as a 6-year-old sits atop her coffin, placed there by Roger or one of the other siblings, an homage to Antonia's undying hope, a hope that is now passed on to her family. It seems that any chance of discovering Luis's fate might have died with Antonia. After all, who else would pursue it so relentlessly? The case is 54 years cold by 2005, and the world has moved on to new tragedies, new mysteries. But the story of Luis Albino does not end here, not even close. Unknown to his grieving family, Luis himself was very much alive through all those years, living a life parallel to theirs, ignorant of the drama that had defined his early childhood, unaware that across the country, a mother prayed for him every single day. The miracle that Antonia prayed for was still possible, and it would come about not by chance or by standard police work, but by the powerful, invisible threads of DNA and the determination of a new generation who refused to let the story end. If you're still watching, make sure you hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, do you think Luis had any memories of his real family? Do you think deep down he knew something was wrong? Let me know your thoughts. And make sure you're subscribed because part 2 is where everything changes. The DNA test that solved a 73-year mystery is coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. While the Albino family was searching, praying, and keeping Luis's memory alive in California, what was happening to the boy himself? To truly appreciate the incredible resolution of this story, we must step into Luis's shoes and imagine the life he led, unknowingly separated from his true identity, living as someone he was never meant to be. Picture 6-year-old Luis on that fateful day in 1951, being pulled along by the unknown woman after his brother ran off to get help. We can only speculate about the immediate aftermath, but based on what was later uncovered, some details are chillingly clear. The woman took Luis onto an airplane. A shocking twist considering air travel in 1951 wasn't as common or straightforward as it is today. Commercial flights did exist, but security was virtually non-existent. A child could be brought onto a plane without identification, without questions, without fuss. Perhaps she told airline staff that Luis was her son, and he was simply restless or shy. If Luis cried for his mother initially, maybe the woman comforted or threatened him into silence. We'll never know exactly what happened in those hours, but we know where they ended up. It's chilling to imagine that moment. A little boy who had likely never been on a plane before, pressed up against the window as the California landscape receded below, carrying him further and further from home with every passing minute. The woman's face, perhaps at first comforting and kind, might have revealed a harder edge as she kept him under control during the journey. They flew clear across the country, arriving somewhere on the U.S. East Coast. The exact location remains undisclosed publicly to protect Luis's privacy, but it's likely a city or town far removed from Oakland in both culture and distance. Here, Luis's memory of his old life may have rapidly begun to blur, may have started to fade like a dream upon waking. If he spoke mostly Spanish at age 6, and suddenly he's in an environment where the primary language spoken is English, depending on who took him in, it would add to his confusion and isolation. We know from later revelations that Luis ended up in the care of a couple who raised him as their own son. How did this come to be? Was the woman in the bandana acting on behalf of this couple, perhaps as a broker in some illegal adoption ring? Or were they the ones who orchestrated the kidnapping for themselves, desperate for a child? That remains a mystery even now. But what's certain is that Luis found himself in a new home with new parents, his entire world turned upside down in a matter of hours. These adoptive parents, whether the adoption was legal or, more likely, completely off the books, took in the stolen boy and gave him a new life. They might have given him a different name entirely. In fact, it's probable that Luis grew up under a completely new identity, which is exactly why he never popped up in any of the searches under Luis Albino. He might have been told, "You're our child. You've always been ours." Or perhaps, "You're adopted and your birth parents died and couldn't care for you," or some fabricated story to explain his origins. We know one thing for certain. Luis believed these were his real parents, or at least had no idea he'd been abducted. By all accounts, they treated him as their son, and he had no inkling of the crime that had occurred, no idea that across the country a mother was searching for him with every breath. One can't help but wonder if little Luis remembered his early years at all. Did he recall the warm shores of Puerto Rico where he was born? Did he remember his mother's face, her smile, the way she sang to him? Did he remember Roger's laughter, playing in the park, the sound of Spanish being spoken at home? At 6 years old, children have solid memories, but those can fade if not reinforced, especially if trauma and time intervene, especially if someone is actively trying to erase them. Perhaps for a while he cried for his mama and hermanos in Oakland, but if he did, those pleas were ignored or explained away by his new caretakers. Over time, the human mind often adapts to survive, especially a child's mind. A young child might gradually accept the new reality, especially if he's treated kindly, especially if there's no other choice. We don't know if his kidnappers were abusive or loving. In this case, it seems they raised him well enough for him to thrive as an adult, to become a good man. It's possible that apart from the original sin of stealing him, they gave him a decent home, a good education, a chance at life. It's a complicated moral question that we'll never fully answer. So Luis grows up on the East Coast. This life, the only one he knows, the only one he remembers. He goes to school, makes friends, learns to speak fluent English, likely losing most of his Spanish if his new family didn't speak it. He probably celebrates birthdays not knowing his real birth family is saying prayers for him each year on that same day. When he loses a tooth, the tooth fairy comes. When he skins his knee, his adoptive mother bandages it. When he graduates from middle school, from high school, every milestone happens in this parallel universe where he's someone else's son, where he has a different name, a different history, a different life. As the turbulent 1960s arrive, Luis is a teenager. Maybe he plays baseball or joins the Boy Scouts. Maybe he has a girlfriend, goes to prom, dreams about his future. The war in Vietnam looms large over every young man's life, and like many of his generation, Luis joins the United States Marine Corps. Perhaps it was patriotism. Perhaps the military was a ticket to opportunity for him, a way to prove himself, to serve his country. He may have enlisted or been drafted around the mid-1960s, if only the Albino family had known. They were searching military muster rolls for his name, desperately hoping to find some trace of him. But he wasn't Luis Albino in the Marines. He was whoever his new identity said he was. He was a ghost living under someone else's name. It's one of those poignant, heartbreaking ironies. The Albino family suspected he might join the military. They checked records, they asked questions. And indeed, Luis did join, even serving 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine, fighting in one of the most brutal conflicts in American history. All the while they had no idea, and neither did he, that he was fighting half a world away from a family who still longed to find him, who still prayed for him every night. One can imagine that somewhere during these years, his adoptive parents might have told him he was adopted, if they did at all. Perhaps as he left for the Marines, they shared the truth, or their version of it. You aren't biologically ours. We took you in as a child when you had no one else. If so, he may have felt gratitude or curiosity about his origins. But if they lied about how they got him, if they concocted a story that his birth parents were dead or unable to care for him, that would have closed the door on his searching for them. And if they never told him at all, he would go on believing he was born to them, leaving no reason whatsoever to dig into any family history or question his identity. After serving bravely in Vietnam, surviving combat twice, and coming home with the scars all veterans carry, Luis returns to the States as a decorated veteran. He builds a life for himself, a good life. He becomes a firefighter, a career that speaks to a character of courage and service. This is a man who runs toward danger to help others, who puts his life on the line to save strangers, not knowing that once upon a time danger had come for him in the form of a stranger at a park. By the 1970s or 1980s, Luis is settling down into civilian life. He marries, falls in love, builds a home. He starts a family of his own. Children are born, making him a father and eventually a grandfather. These children and grandchildren grow up loving a kind, brave man who they know as their dad or grandpa, completely oblivious to the extraordinary twist of fate in his background, to the secret written in his DNA. Luis's life appears from the outside entirely ordinary, even exemplary, a military veteran, a firefighter, a family man who coaches Little League and attends church and barbecues on weekends. There's no cloud of suspicion or mystery around him. He likely never had reason to contact any adoption agency or search for biological family because he either didn't know he was missing one or had been led to believe there was no one to find, that his birth parents were long gone. Through all these years, he's living under the warm embrace of a family, just not the one he was born into. It's bittersweet to think that while Antonia was praying daily for her son's well-being, lighting candles and keeping vigil, across the country Luis was indeed alive and well, perhaps experiencing moments of inexplicable melancholy or a sense of something missing without knowing why. Or maybe he felt totally complete and happy, which in many ways would be a blessing. He was spared the pain of knowing he had been taken, spared the trauma of knowing his mother never stopped searching. By 2020, Luis is about 75 years old. He's likely retired after decades of firefighting, his body bearing the marks of a life spent in service. Perhaps he's enjoying a quiet life, tending a garden, spoiling his grandkids with ice cream and stories, swapping war tales with fellow veterans at the VFW Hall on Friday nights. He's completely unaware that back in California, a large extended family still occasionally speaks his name in hushed tones and wonders what became of him, still lights candles on his birthday, still keeps his memory alive. Luis has lived a full life, 7 decades of experiences and memories and relationships. But the chapter that is about to open will bring a reckoning of his past that he never saw coming, a revelation that will shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about himself. And it will start with a simple decision made by someone he's never met, someone whose grandmother never stopped believing in miracles. His niece Alita, deciding to take a DNA test for fun. Make sure you stay for part 2, because what happens next will blow your mind. The DNA test, the 22% match, the impossible discovery that changes everything. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the conclusion of this incredible story. And comment below, do you think Luis should have been told the truth? Or was it better that he lived his life not knowing? I want to hear from you. The year is 2020. The world is grappling with a pandemic that has changed everything. People are isolated in their homes, working remotely, attending Zoom meetings in pajamas, and many are turning to hobbies like genealogy and DNA testing to pass the time and connect with family history. Alita Aliquin, a 63-year-old woman living in the Bay Area, has always been curious about her ancestry. She is one of Antonia's granddaughters, the daughter of one of Luis's siblings. All her life, Alita has heard the haunting family legend of Uncle Luis, the little boy who went missing and never came home. She grew up with that faded newspaper clipping her grandmother kept, with the stories whispered at family gatherings, with the empty place at the table that was never filled. Even though she wasn't born when it happened, Luis's disappearance left a mark on her family that trickled down through generations like a genetic memory. Alita learned from a young age that her grandmother Antonia never gave up on finding her lost son, that she went to her grave believing he was alive somewhere. Now, with her grandmother and many of that older generation gone, the tale of Uncle Luis is a piece of family history that Alita figures will likely remain a mystery forever, one of those tragic unsolved cases that families carry like scars. At 63, during the long isolation of the pandemic, Alita decides to take an online ancestry DNA test, one of those kits where you mail in a saliva sample and get back details on your genetic makeup and matches with relatives. She isn't necessarily trying to solve the family mystery with this test. According to her own account, she did it just for fun, out of curiosity during lockdown. Perhaps she was curious about what parts of the world her ancestors came from, what percentage Puerto Rican or Spanish or African she might be. Or maybe she hoped to connect with distant cousins she'd never met, to build out her family tree. These tests have become incredibly popular, revealing all sorts of surprises in families everywhere. People discover unknown siblings, biological parents they never knew existed, confirm stories of heritage that had been passed down through oral tradition. For Alita, maybe there's a flicker of hope in the back of her mind. What if something comes up related to Uncle Luis? But after nearly 70 years, it feels far-fetched, impossible even. She sends off the test and waits, not expecting much beyond some interesting percentages and maybe a few third cousin matches. When Alita receives her DNA results online a few weeks later, she likely scrolls through the report expecting to see a breakdown of ethnic percentages, maybe a list of second or third cousins who've also tested, people she's never heard of scattered across the country. But her eyes widen in shock as she sees something completely unexpected, something that makes her heart stop for a moment. There's a close family match with an unknown man, someone she doesn't recognize. In fact, the DNA site indicates about 22% shared DNA with this person. Alita stares at the screen, her mind racing. That percentage is significant, very significant. In genetic genealogy terms, 25% shared DNA typically means a first-degree relative like a grandparent, grandchild, half-sibling, or an aunt-uncle relationship. 22% is just slightly below that, well within the range for an uncle, especially with the natural variation in genetic inheritance. Alita's heart likely skips a beat, then starts pounding. Could this be him? Could this actually be Uncle Luis? After all these years, after everyone assuming he was probably dead, could he be alive and have taken a DNA test? She double-checks the information with shaking hands. The match is listed as a man around the right age, somewhere in his 70s based on the information available. The site might give an age range, or at least she can infer from other clues. She doesn't recognize the name or username shown. This man isn't someone in her known family tree, isn't anyone she's ever heard mentioned at family gatherings. And the percentage is way too high for a random distant cousin. The realization dawns on her like lightning. The only logical person this could be is her long-lost Uncle Luis, or possibly a child of his. But a child of Luis, her first cousin, would share about 12.5% with her, not 22%. No, this 22% match is closer than a cousin. It suggests the man himself, the actual Luis. Unless it's a half-sibling of hers, but she knows of no missing siblings except Luis. It has to be him. Alita's hands tremble as she processes this information, as the full weight of what she might have stumbled upon crashes over her. After nearly 7 decades, could it be that Luis is not only alive, but had also, perhaps unknowingly, taken a DNA test that wound up in the same database? What are the odds? It seems impossible, like something out of a movie. But the science doesn't lie. DNA doesn't make mistakes like this. With excitement and a sense of disbelief that makes her feel dizzy, Alita composes a message through the DNA service to this mystery man. Her fingers hover over the keyboard as she tries to figure out what to say. How do you reach out to someone who might be your long-lost uncle without sounding completely insane? Perhaps she writes something like, "Hello, I see we have a significant DNA match showing we're close relatives. I'm trying to learn more about my family history. Do you know of any relatives from Puerto Rico or Oakland, California? Do you have any information about your birth or adoption? Please contact me. This is very important to my family." She hits send and waits, her heart pounding, checking her email every few minutes. Days pass with no response. Then weeks. Nothing. Alita checks the website regularly, obsessively, looking for a reply, or at least to see if the message was read. Still nothing. The man on the other end might not even be actively using the website anymore. Some people mail in a test, glance at the results once, and never log in again. It's also possible the man is cautious or confused by the message from a stranger claiming a close relation. Maybe he thinks it's a scam. Maybe he's scared of what the answer might mean. Alita is left in frustrating silence, so close to an answer, but unable to reach it. Is this match truly her missing uncle? And if so, how can she reach him? What can she do? Eventually, life's distractions pull her attention away. The world in 2020 and 2021 is chaotic and scary with COVID-19, with lockdowns and vaccines and uncertainty. And perhaps the lack of response leads Alita to shelve the idea for the time being, to file it away as another dead end in a case full of them. But even as she returns to normal life, even as the pandemic eases and the world opens up again, the unanswered question about that DNA match never fully leaves Alita's mind. It lingers quietly like a puzzle piece waiting to be placed, like an itch she can't scratch. Who is this man? Why did he match so closely? Why won't he respond? 4 long years slip by. It's now early 2024. A lot has changed in the world since Alita first took that DNA test. Perhaps by now she's heard more stories of genetic genealogy solving mysteries, news stories of cold case crimes cracked by identifying DNA matches, reunions of families separated by adoption or tragedy. Maybe she watched a documentary on TV or read an article online that sparked a thought. What about that match I found? What if I tried again, but this time with more determination, with more resources, with help? One evening in early 2024, Alita sits down at her computer, determined to make another attempt at solving the family mystery that her grandmother died never knowing the answer to. This time, Alita enlists help. Her own daughters, Luis's great-nieces, now adults themselves with research skills and internet savvy, join in the mission. It becomes a multi-generational effort. Grandmother and granddaughters united by a shared purpose. They gather around a laptop, digging for any information on the name attached to that DNA match. Perhaps with some clever internet sleuthing, some late nights scrolling through databases and social media, they manage to find a person who could be him. It might be through public records, people finder sites, or even Facebook. If the man used his real name or a traceable username on the DNA site, they might uncover addresses, phone numbers, or at least some clues. An obituary mentioning his name as a surviving relative. A yearbook photo from long ago. A directory listing for an East Coast location. They piece together fragments of information like detectives. In fact, according to later reports, Alita and her daughters decided to go old school and hit the library for old newspapers, realizing that to convince authorities or even themselves, they needed solid evidence tying this unknown man to the little boy who vanished in 1951. So Alita visits the Oakland Public Library, where archives of the old Oakland Tribune are kept on microfilm, rolls and rolls of history, waiting to be rediscovered. She threads the reel with the help of a librarian and winds back time to 1951, scanning through the microfilmed pages, her eyes straining under the fluorescent lights. And then, with a rush of triumph that makes her gasp out loud, she finds them. The articles about her uncle's kidnapping, preserved all these years. On one of those grainy, faded pages from February 1951, she sees a photograph of young Roger and Luis taken in the aftermath of the abduction, likely a picture the newspaper used to help find the boy. Roger, 10 years old with worried eyes, and Luis, 6, with his gap-toothed smile, frozen in time in black and white. Two innocent faces from a bygone era, from a world before computers and cell phones and DNA databases. Alita gazes at Luis's face in that photo, committing every feature to memory, feeling a connection across time. She has seen copies of this photo before in family albums, but now it has renewed meaning, urgent meaning. If her hunch is right, that little boy grew up to be the man on the other end of that DNA test. She takes whatever information she has gleaned about the mystery man. Let's say she managed to find a name, maybe even a picture on the internet. It could be a profile picture from a public genealogy forum, or maybe his name tied to a mention in a local news story. Remember, he was a firefighter. Perhaps there was a feature article on retired firemen in some small-town newspaper, or a community piece that included a photo of him receiving an award, or a Facebook profile of a person with that name showing an elderly man with grandchildren. Alita compares that modern image, pixelated and in color, to the cherished childhood photo of Luis, faded and black and white. It might seem impossible to connect a 6-year-old's face to a 75-year-old's face, but family resemblances have a way of enduring, of transcending time. Perhaps she notices that the older man's eyes, the shape of them, the way they crinkle at the corners, strongly resemble her own mother's eyes. Maybe the nose is the same, that distinctive albino nose. Maybe he has the family's characteristic smile. Her conviction solidifies with each comparison. This has to be him. The odds of someone matching that much DNA and having even a passing physical resemblance are astronomical. Impossible, unless he's family. And the only missing family member of that closeness is Uncle Luis. Armed with the Tribune clippings carefully copied, the childhood photos, and her DNA results printed out and highlighted, Alita approaches the Oakland Police Department. It's been almost 73 years since the original crime, an entire human lifetime. One imagines the front desk officer's astonishment when this determined woman comes in on a regular Tuesday and says, with absolute conviction, "I have information on a missing persons case from 1951. Perhaps initially they don't know what she's referring to. The officer might blink in confusion. 1951? Ma'am, that's over 70 years ago. But missing persons cases are never officially closed until resolved, and somewhere in their archives, Luis Albino's file still exists. She provides the details, her name, her relation to Luis Albino, the story passed down through her family for generations, and now this DNA match that indicates he might be alive on the East Coast. She spreads her evidence on the counter, the newspaper clippings, the DNA results, the photos. At first, it might sound far-fetched, crazy even. An officer might exchange glances with a colleague, but consider the timing and context. By 2024, police are well aware of the power of DNA and genealogy. They've solved decades-old murder cases through genetic genealogy. They know that stranger things have happened, that cold cases can break open in the most unexpected ways. The Oakland Police Missing Persons Unit listens to Alita with growing interest. According to official accounts, on March 18, 2024, Alita formally presented her findings and theory to the investigators. She essentially says, with her evidence laid out before them, "I think my uncle Luis, who was kidnapped as a child in 1951, is alive and living under another identity on the East Coast, and I believe I've found him through a DNA match. This is him." This must have been one of the most extraordinary claims they'd heard in their entire careers. Officers who work cold cases dream of moments like this, but they rarely actually happen. But the evidence she brings, the DNA match percentage, the old newspaper photo, the timeline, it's all compelling enough to warrant investigation. It's enough that the Oakland Police Department makes a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. They reopened the missing persons case of Luis Armando Albino, a case that had been cold for over 7 decades, gathering dust in a filing cabinet somewhere. Detectives who take on this case must feel a surge of excitement at the possibility of cracking one of the oldest mysteries on their books, and also perhaps a sense of duty to finally give this family the answers they've sought for so long. The police don't work alone on this. Given the potential interstate nature of the case, kidnapping across state lines, and the sheer age and complexity of it, they enlist the help of the FBI and the California Department of Justice. The FBI in particular has jurisdiction over kidnapping cases that cross state lines, and even though this happened 73 years ago, it technically remains an unsolved federal abduction. The involvement of these agencies means resources and expertise are available that far surpass what existed in 1951. It's like bringing a Cold War-era case into the age of supercomputers, genetic science, and databases that can search millions of records in seconds. Investigators verify Alita's evidence meticulously, checking and double-checking everything. Then they likely contact the DNA testing company to get any additional information on that match, perhaps a full name or contact info if available within privacy regulations. Law enforcement can sometimes access data if it's a missing person scenario and not purely a criminal investigation. Or they might ask Alita to message the match again, this time more urgently, explaining that law enforcement needs to speak with him. Perhaps concurrently, they use public records and proprietary databases to narrow down who this man could be. Alita's work may have already given them a name and general location. Imagine the day they find a record. A man with a certain name who is about 75 years old, lives in, for example, somewhere on the East Coast, let's say New York or Pennsylvania. Originally from records that are unclear, since if he had a birth certificate created or falsified in the 1950s, that might confuse things. But they find an address, a phone number, maybe even a photo from public records. With cautious optimism and careful planning, FBI agents prepare to reach out to the man. This part is incredibly delicate. How do you approach someone with news that upends everything they know about themselves? How do you tell a 75-year-old man that his entire life might be based on a lie? Possibly they start by contacting one of his children or a relative from his adoptive family's side, but more likely they go directly to the man himself to maintain discretion and control the situation. One day, the man who is Luis, now in his mid-70s, gets a knock on his door, or perhaps a phone call. It's the FBI or an official-looking group of investigators with badges and serious expressions. One can imagine him puzzled, maybe even worried. What business could the FBI possibly have with a law-abiding retired firefighter? Has someone stolen his identity? Is there some kind of mistake? They might ask him to sit down. They might ask, "Did you ever take a DNA test, sir? Or has anyone in your family?" Perhaps he says, "Yes. One of my kids got me one of those ancestry kits a few years back as a gift. I did it just for fun, to see where my family came from. Didn't think much of it." They might then gently, carefully explain that they have reason to believe he might be connected to a very old missing child case from California. He is probably perplexed, maybe in disbelief. He might even chuckle nervously at the seeming absurdity. "You think I'm a missing person? I've lived here my whole life. You must have the wrong guy. Officers, I think there's been some mistake." But the investigators explain further, their voices gentle but firm. In 1951, a 6-year-old boy named Luis Albino was abducted from a park in Oakland, California. He was never found. The case went cold. But new DNA evidence suggests that you, sir, are that boy. We believe you are Luis Armando Albino. Try to put yourself in his position at that moment. Imagine the sheer cognitive dissonance, the feeling of reality tilting on its axis. The investigators are telling you that you might be someone who was kidnapped as a child 73 years ago, that your entire identity might not be real, that somewhere there's a family who has been looking for you for 7 decades. If he had any inkling he was adopted, his thoughts might race. Could that story I was told about my birth not be true? Were my parents lying to me? If he had no idea whatsoever, it would be even more jarring, more impossible to process. How could I be someone else? I know who I am. I have memories, a birth certificate, a whole life. Perhaps he laughs it off at first, shakes his head. Officers, I think you've made a mistake. Check your records again. But the agents present something convincing, something he cannot easily dismiss. Maybe they show him a copy of that 1951 newspaper with the photo of him as a boy, the same photo Alita found in the library. They slide it across the table. "This is you, sir. This is a photo from 1951. You were 6 years old when this was taken, right before you disappeared." He peers at the image of the little child who vanished, and maybe, just maybe, something stirs deep in his memory. A flash of something, a park, a woman's face, The feeling of fear. Or maybe it's simply the uncanny familiarity of seeing his own 6-year-old face staring back at him from history, a face he doesn't remember ever being but somehow recognizes. Inevitably, they ask for his cooperation to confirm via DNA, to put this question to rest once and for all. At this point, he likely agrees. Maybe he's still thinking this is surreal, some bizarre mistake that will be cleared up, but what's the harm in a test? A simple cheek swab is taken, placed in a sterile container, labeled, and sent off to the lab. They already have DNA samples from his biological family, from one of his surviving siblings, Alita's mother, one of his sisters who is still alive and has been waiting for news all her life. The DNA analysis is done with painstaking care, compared and cross-referenced multiple times, and then the results come back, conclusive, undeniable. He is indeed the biological son of Antonia Albino, brother to Roger and the others. In other words, after 73 years, Luis Armando Albino has been found. Comment right now if you're getting goosebumps. Because what comes next is the reunion nobody thought would ever happen. What a moment that must have been when the results came back to the investigators. For them, it's a moment of triumph and astonishment, the kind of break that detectives dream about but rarely experience. They've found a person who was a 6-year-old missing child and is today a living, breathing senior citizen with a full life. For Alita and her family back in California, when they get the call, it's almost like hearing someone found a ghost alive. They knew in their hearts, like Antonia knew, that he was alive somewhere. But to actually get that confirmation, to hear an FBI agent say, "We found him, Luis is alive," it's overwhelming, incomprehensible, miraculous. On June 20th, 2024, Alita gets the call she has been waiting for her entire life. The investigators inform her and her mother, Luis's sister, who is now in her 80s, that Luis has been found alive and confirmed through DNA. They likely visit in person to deliver this incredible news, sitting in Alita's living room with official reports and photos. Alita later recounted that she and her mother managed to hold their composure during the official briefing, nodding and asking questions, taking in the information professionally. But once the officials left, once the door closed behind them, they broke down completely. They gripped each other's hands and cried tears of joy, decades of grief pouring out. "We found him," they whispered to each other through sobs. "We actually found him. Abuela was right. He was alive all along." Imagine the flurry of preparations and emotions that followed in the next few days. They had a name and contact information for Luis, but he himself was processing this news too, grappling with the revelation that he'd been living under a stolen identity his entire life. Did he immediately agree to meet his birth family? From all accounts, yes. He was open and even grateful. Perhaps in that short span between finding out and meeting them, he had to reconcile 73 years of life built on a certain narrative with this new, shocking reality. He might have felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, curiosity, maybe anger toward those who took him, confusion about what to call himself now, about who he really is. But above all, he must have felt a strange excitement, a sense of something missing his whole life suddenly clicking into place. He had blood relatives he never knew existed, and they had been looking for him for decades, never giving up hope. Just days after the confirmation, arrangements are made for a reunion. The FBI and local authorities assist in coordinating what could become a media circus, but the family requests privacy initially, wanting these first precious moments to be intimate and personal. On June 24th, 2024, a plane lands at Oakland International Airport. A poetic full circle since decades ago, a plane took him away from Oakland, and now a plane brings him home. Luis, now about 79 years old, steps off the aircraft, possibly with one or more of his children by his side for support, there to help their father navigate this surreal experience. What is going through his mind as he takes in the sights of California, of Oakland, the city of his birth that he doesn't remember? This might be his first time back since 1951, since he was 6 years old. The smells, the light, the atmosphere might feel oddly familiar in a way he can't explain, or they might feel entirely new. At a private location, perhaps Alita's home, or another family member's house in Oakland, relatives gather, dozens of them, buzzing with anticipation and nerves. There are likely many people waiting, siblings, nieces, nephews, their kids, a whole extended family. After all, he was one of 6 siblings originally, and now only a few might still be alive, but their children and grandchildren have multiplied. We know Roger, now 83 years old, and the brother who witnessed the abduction, is definitely there waiting, his heart pounding. Alita is there, the woman who cracked the case through sheer determination. Her mother, Luis's sister, is there, about 86 years old, heart pounding at the thought of meeting the baby brother she thought she'd lost forever. The door opens and Luis walks in, a tall, elderly man with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a nervous smile. Alita sees the man she only knew from an old photo and that one DNA match on a computer screen. She has described what happened next in interviews, her voice still filled with emotion. He walked up to her immediately and gave her a hug, a real tight hug. And then he said something that brought everyone to tears. "Thank you for finding me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then he kissed her on the cheek. Such a simple statement, but it holds a universe of meaning. Luis in that moment understood that he had been lost, truly lost, and someone cared enough to look for him and bring him home. He's expressing gratitude as if Alita rescued him, though he wasn't in danger in his current life, though he had a family and a good life. But being found reconnected him with his identity and heritage in a way he never knew was missing, filled a void he didn't know existed. Tears stream freely as Alita introduces him to other relatives crowding the room. Perhaps they have photo albums spread out on tables, eager to share with him pictures of the mother he barely remembers, pictures of his father, of grandparents, of family gatherings through the decades where his absence was always felt. Stories tumble out about his siblings growing up, about Antonia's endless search, about how the family never forgot him. He might be stunned to find out how large his birth family is, how many people have been carrying his memory. The next day, they travel to meet Roger, the brother whose quick thinking and courage back in 1951 set this whole saga in motion, and who has carried the burden and guilt of that day for 73 years. Roger is living in Stanislaus County, California, about a couple of hours away from Oakland in the Central Valley. It sounds like Roger by this time might be dealing with health issues given his age, but he's determined to meet his brother, has been waiting for this moment since he was 10 years old. Alita drives Luis and her mother out to Roger's home. One can imagine the quiet car ride through California highways. Perhaps they're pointing out landmarks to Luis, telling him about the area, or maybe everyone is quiet, emotionally steeling themselves for the biggest reunion of all. Roger presumably knows his brother is alive now and coming. What would it be like to wait for the brother you lost at age 10 when you're an old man of 83? Did he pace the living room, his walker nearby? Did he glance out the window every minute, watching for the car? Did he prepare anything to say or have questions lined up? Or did he just wait in silent anticipation, his whole life leading to this moment? When they arrive, Alita helps her uncle, who is nearly 80 but still moving fairly well, out of the car. They approach the door slowly. Perhaps Roger comes out onto the porch with tentative steps, maybe using a cane or holding onto the railing. And there they are, two brothers, separated as children by a terrible crime. Now both old men with white hair and lined faces, standing face to face after 73 years. Roger looks into Luis's eyes and perhaps, even after all these years, even through the age and the decades, he sees the little brother he once chased around the park, the little brother he tried to save but couldn't. Luis sees an elderly gentleman with tears streaming down his weathered face, and he senses a connection, a familiarity around the eyes or the shape of the smile that mirrors his own, something in his DNA recognizing family. They close the distance between them and embrace tightly. Observers who were there described it as a really long, tight hug, the kind where neither person wants to be the first to let go, where time seems to stop. In that hug, 73 years of pain and questions are answered without a single word. Roger likely whispers Luisito, the childhood nickname. Or maybe he just cries, unable to speak. Maybe they don't speak at first, just hold on and weep for everything lost and everything found. They sit down together afterward, arm in arm, perhaps on Roger's couch, and they talk for hours. There is so much to say, 73 years of life to catch up on. Roger might share details of what he remembers about the day that changed everything, the trauma he's carried, the guilt. Luis can only piece together fragments, maybe a feeling or two if he recalls anything at all from being 6 years old. They talk about the lives they've lived. Roger might share stories about the family, who married whom, who had children, how their mother Antonia never stopped looking for Luis until the day she died, how she went to the police station every week for years. That news must be emotional for Luis to hear, to learn that his mother loved him so much, believed in him so completely, never gave up. Luis may feel a deep pang of sadness learning she passed in 2005, that he didn't get to see her, didn't get to tell her he was okay, but he's also comforted that she never gave up on him, that she died still believing. They compare notes on military service since it turns out both brothers served their country. Maybe they were even in Vietnam around overlapping times without knowing it. Two brothers fighting the same war on opposite sides of the country, never knowing how close they were. They talk about careers. Roger hears that Luis was a firefighter, a hero who saved lives, and perhaps Roger too had his own career, his own family, his own stories of joy and sorrow. They fill each other in on 73 years of life in as much detail as time allows, cramming 7 decades into a few precious hours. For Roger, this reunion is the fulfillment of a lifetime of guilt and sorrow. Any notion he had that he failed his little brother, that he should have done more, is wiped away in that embrace. His brother is alive. He survived. He's okay. The relief and joy must have been immense, overwhelming. For Luis, it's a gift he probably didn't even know he wanted or needed. A chance to connect with his origins, to know who he was and where he came from, to fill in the blanks of his identity. Many adopted people speak of a sense of completeness when they find their biological family, even if they had a wonderful adoptive life. For Luis, add to that the shock that he hadn't been given up or abandoned, but actually stolen, and that his family always wanted him, spent 73 years looking for him. That knowledge can be healing in its own profound way, validating that he was loved and missed deeply, that he mattered. Over the following days and weeks, Luis meets other surviving siblings, if any are still living, and numerous nieces, nephews, and their children, an entire extended family. There must have been a big family gathering where an entire clan welcomed him home, like the prodigal son returned. They likely shared traditional Puerto Rican foods, dishes Antonia used to make, arroz con gandules, pernil, pastels. Perhaps someone cooked these favorites, and Luis might find them oddly familiar, stirring memories he can't quite place, or entirely new if his adoptive upbringing was completely different. They showed him family heirlooms, the small stash of memories Antonia had kept all those years. Maybe she left behind notes or items that belonged to Luis as a child, a toy, a baby blanket, something she couldn't bear to part with. It's a happy chaos of reunion, of laughter and tears and endless questions. It's also overwhelming. Imagine at nearly 80 years old being plunged into a huge new family, learning dozens of names, navigating new relationships. But reports indicate Luis handled it with grace and happiness, his firefighter training perhaps helping him stay calm in emotionally intense situations. He even spent an extended visit in July 2024 in California, staying longer than planned to bond with his rediscovered family, to learn his history, to piece together the life he should have had. Time, however, was not completely on their side. Shortly after this reunion, in August 2024, Roger passed away. Perhaps his health had been fragile for some time, and he held on through sheer force of will to see his brother one last time, to know he was safe. His passing was bittersweet, undoubtedly deeply sad for Luis and the entire family. But there is profound comfort in knowing that Roger's lifelong wish was granted. He got to hug his brother, to look into his eyes, to know that he was safe and sound and had lived a good life. When Roger left this world, he did so with peace in his heart, instead of the question mark that had hung over him for 73 years. In a sense, it was as if Roger could finally let go, his mission completed, having seen the miracle happen. As for Luis, he returned to his home on the East Coast after that emotional summer visit. But now, with open lines to his West Coast kin, he suddenly had an expanded family who wanted to make up for lost time, who wanted to know him, to love him, to bring him into the fold. It's said that his life from then on would include both the family he knew, his children and grandchildren, who must have been absolutely stunned to learn that their father, their grandfather, had an entirely different identity and family history, and the family he was born into, the Albinos who had been searching for him since 1951. The kidnapping of Luis Albino is now a closed missing person case, but an open investigation as a crime. The Oakland police and FBI officially consider the kidnapping itself an active, albeit very cold case. They have one burning question that may never be answered. Who was the woman in the bandana? And why did she do it? After all this time, that question remains maddeningly elusive. What we do know from Luis's account and the investigation is frustratingly scant. Luis, having been only 6 at the time, and then living a completely different life for 73 years, doesn't have clear answers. He didn't even know he was kidnapped until 2024, so he has no coherent memory to offer beyond what might be hidden deep in his subconscious. The woman in the green bandana was described by Roger as being in her 30s in 1951, which means if by some slim chance she's alive today, she'd be over 105 years old. It's far more likely she went to her grave decades ago without facing justice or revealing her deeds, her motivations, her identity. She could have been anyone. A neighbor with ill intent, a member of a child trafficking ring that operated in the shadows of post-war America, or, as many investigators suspect, Someone who abducted a child specifically for the purpose of handing him over to a couple that desperately wanted a child but couldn't adopt through legal channels. That latter theory seems plausible, given Luis ended up in a stable family environment, was raised well enough to become a productive, good man. It might have been a black market adoption scenario, sadly not unheard of in the mid-20th century when adoption regulations were lax and corruption existed. There were even notorious cases like the Tennessee Children's Home scandal, where children were abducted or coerced away from families for illegal adoptions. We have no evidence Luis's case was connected to any larger organized scheme, but the pattern fits disturbingly well. A stranger abducts a child and delivers him to new parents far away, across the country where no one would ever think to look. The adoptive parents who raised Luis are another enigma wrapped in mystery. Did they know he was kidnapped? Or were they told, perhaps by the bandana woman if she was an illegal broker of sorts, that the child was abandoned or an orphan in desperate need of a home? If they were complicit criminals, knowing participants in a kidnapping, it would cast his whole upbringing in a sinister light, taint every memory. But if they were unsuspecting victims themselves, truly believing they lawfully adopted him, albeit likely without proper papers, then the real villain would be solely the kidnapper, and his adoptive parents were just desperate people who wanted a child. Unfortunately, by the time Luis and law enforcement learned the truth in 2024, those who raised him had already passed away years before. Given Luis was almost 80, his adoptive parents would have been well over 100 if alive. There's no opportunity to interrogate them, to learn their side of the story, to understand their motivations or knowledge. The truth died with them. It's haunting to think that somewhere in old Oakland police files from 1951, there's perhaps a composite sketch or a brief description of the suspect, a woman, 30s, bandana, Spanish-speaking, seen on that day. That description never matched anyone at the time, and now it's unlikely to ever be matched definitively to a real name, a real person, a real motive. The paper trail in 1951 would be almost non-existent. Plane tickets weren't tracked electronically. If she used cash and gave a common name, nothing would stand out in records. The East Coast side of the journey left little trace unless someone at the time looked for a woman arriving with a child suddenly, and no one was looking because no one knew where to look. The criminal side remains frustratingly unsolved. But the triumph of this story, the reason we're telling it, is that the victim was found alive. In the world of true crime and missing persons, that is a rare and precious outcome, a miracle. Luis's case stands as one of the longest-running missing child cases where the child was found alive in U.S. history. Over 7 decades. It's nothing short of astounding, miraculous, impossible, and yet it happened. One might ask, and many have, how did Luis feel about learning that he was kidnapped? It's one thing to meet new family, to have an interesting genealogy reveal, but it's another thing entirely to grapple with the fact that the people you trusted as your parents, who raised you and loved you, had perhaps deceived you, at least by omission. From what little has been said publicly, Luis seemed to handle it with remarkable grace and maturity. He expressed gratitude for being found, for learning the truth. Perhaps in his mind, at nearly 80 years old, he had the wisdom and maturity to understand that nothing could change the past, and dwelling on anger or bitterness wouldn't help anyone. He didn't seem to harbor publicly known bitterness or rage. If his adoptive parents treated him well, and by all accounts they did, maybe he can find it in his heart to forgive them if they knew, or at least not dwell on that betrayal if they didn't. Or maybe he simply compartmentalizes, a skill he may have learned in Vietnam or as a firefighter. He has 2 lives, one that was given to him under false pretenses, and one that was reunited with him through science and determination. Both are part of who he is now. For his children and grandchildren, learning that dad, that grandpa, is actually someone else by birth, that his entire identity was stolen, must have been a shock too, the kind of revelation that shakes a family tree to its roots. But likely they embraced it with love and support because it meant gaining more family, more connections, and seeing him happy to know his roots, to finally understand where he came from. Many of them traveled with him to meet the California clan, indicating their support and curiosity, their desire to help him navigate this incredible journey. As for Alita, the niece who didn't give up, who took a DNA test for fun and ended up solving a 73-year mystery, she's been hailed as the hero of the family, and rightfully so. It was her intuition, her persistence, her refusal to let the mystery die with her grandmother that cracked the case wide open. The Oakland police publicly acknowledged that Alita's efforts were instrumental, that without her determination, this case would have remained unsolved forever. They said in a press conference, "The outcome of this story is what we strive for." Indeed, law enforcement often sees the heartbreak of cold cases that never get solved, of families that never get answers. Having a 73-year-old missing persons case close with a joyful family reunion is beyond rare. It's the kind of result that detectives dream of, but almost never see. The Albino family story teaches us never to lose hope, no matter how much time passes, no matter how impossible the situation seems. Antonia didn't live to see the day, didn't get to hold her son one more time, but her hope was vindicated. Her faith was proven true. One imagines that somewhere in whatever comes after this life, she's smiling, knowing her belief in her son's survival was correct all along, that her prayers were answered even if she didn't live to see it. The family's persistence across generations, combined with modern technology that didn't exist when Luis was taken, made the impossible possible. It also highlights the incredible power of genetic genealogy. Who could have guessed in 1951 that the key to finding Luis would not be a witness or a clue in a police file, but rather a few cells swabbed from a cheek and a vast database comparing markers in DNA across millions of people? This is truly a 21st century solution to a mid-20th century mystery. DNA doesn't forget. It doesn't fade with time. It carries the truth of who we are across generations, written in code in every cell of our bodies, just waiting for someone to read it. As more and more people enter their DNA into databases, we can expect more such miraculous reunions for other families, and also resolution of crimes that have long gone unsolved. The case of Luis Armando Albino remains technically open in terms of finding the perpetrator. But realistically, justice in the legal sense might never be served. The kidnapper is almost certainly dead. The adoptive parents are dead. There's no one left to prosecute. Instead, justice has taken a more poetic form. A lost boy was returned to his family. A wrong was made right, showing that love and tenacity can outlast even the longest silences, even 7 decades of darkness. In 2024, Oakland police officially closed the missing person aspect of Luis's case. They no longer have to wonder if he's out there somewhere. They know he is. They know he's home in the emotional sense. However, they did keep the kidnapping case active, meaning if any evidence or leads about the kidnapper or accomplices ever surface, perhaps through historical records someone discovers in an attic or a deathbed confession recorded long ago, they would investigate. But every passing day makes that prospect less likely, and perhaps that's okay. Perhaps the closure of finding Luis alive is enough. In the end, some mysteries of this story will remain for the ages, unsolved puzzles. Yet the story of Luis Albino does not feel incomplete. It has a beginning shrouded in fear and confusion, a long middle of unanswered prayers and relentless searching, and an ending filled with warmth, tears, and embraces. It's an ending Antonia dreamed of every night, one Roger waited a lifetime to see, and one Luis never expected but welcomed with open arms. If you made it to the end of this story, I need you to do something for me right now. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I bring you true stories like this that will stay with you forever. Second, smash that like button if this story moved you, if it gave you hope, if it reminded you that miracles can happen. Third, and most important, comment below and tell me, would you want to know if you were kidnapped as a child? Would you want to meet your birth family after 73 years, or would it be too painful? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this. And please share this video because Luis's story deserves to be heard far and wide. It's a story about survival, about hope, about never giving up even when everyone tells you it's impossible. It's about a grandmother's faith, a brother's guilt, a niece's determination, and a DNA test that changed everything. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Remember, it's never too late for a miracle.